Jeff England's going to come and speak next. He's the CFO for Silverstar Communications. We have a couple things that I'd like to convey to you is Jeff has provided testimony to our legislative leaders in the United States, and he's been a framework of setting up a cyber protection plan, which if you leave this conference and you drive home, you need to think about having a cyber protection plan in place. But what we found in listening with Jeff is that he can speak to the audience and he can make it so it's very saleable to you to understand the management of risk. So I'd ask you to welcome Jeff England. I think you'll find his presentation very informative. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. I appreciate everything that Special Agent Bobbitt had to share with you today. It's true, as anybody who is an advocate of improving cybersecurity practices in an organization knows that this is something that costs money, but as a CFO and as a risk manager, I look at it as any other type of risk mitigation investment that we might make as a company. And when I see a presentation here in your meeting today about vendors that can help reduce ramp-up time from 7 to 1 hour to down to 5 minutes, clearly downtime is something that is of an issue or concern for anybody that's in this room. And I think you can see from the presentation that Special Agent Bobbitt prepared that a breach and an attack on your system can be crippling. And that creates downtime. And these are real dollar expenditures. And so it's a significant thing to be addressed. I also just want to say briefly, I think a cybersecurity response plan is truly important, but I would perhaps differentiate in your mind the difference between a cybersecurity risk mitigation plan and a response plan, because oftentimes response is too late. And so the risk mitigation side is where I hope to touch today, share with you some of the things that I've learned as I've been involved in this area of interest, and to hopefully give you some practical ways in which you can go back to your organizations and start having some conversations about improvements and in particular increasing some visibility. As a communications provider, and just really briefly by way of background, I am new to Silverstar Communications. We are located in western Wyoming. We service the areas of Jackson Hole down into Star Valley. We actually go over into Idaho as well. We're really excited. This last year has been an exciting year for us. In December of 2014, we launched a gigabit service in Jackson, Wyoming. We're the first gigabit provider in the state. Jackson Hole is the first community to receive that. We now offer a gigabit service to our customers in Freedom and Thane. And we also are the first gigabit service provider in Idaho. We service Idaho Falls and Ammon, Idaho, with gigabit service there. And so as a communications provider, we're always trying to be out front, giving as much as a service as we can for our customers. And I'm new to communications. I've been with Silverstar for about 2 years. Previous to that, I worked as a CFO for a small business contractor in College Station, Texas. And down there we did cybersecurity audits for Department of Homeland Security. And so I know a little bit about the risk, and I know a little bit about the industry. And as it turns out, in February of 2013, when I had just accepted this position to Silverstar, President Obama had issued an executive order calling upon all critical infrastructure industries, which includes communications as well as everybody in this room, to voluntarily adopt measures within their organizations to improve their cybersecurity posture. And as a fallout from that, there are a number of things that have been happening on the government side to provide you with resources. And one of them is the development of what's called the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And if you're unfamiliar with what that is, I encourage you to go to nist.gov and follow the links to the Cybersecurity Framework. It's a free tool that's available for you to use and to download. NIST has always been involved in terms of providing cybersecurity industry best practice documentation. But what the framework does is it provides a real comprehensive way of looking at it in a totality. And what we found in our organization, it was a great starting point for us in developing a cybersecurity risk mitigation plan. So as we read through the NIST cybersecurity framework, And as I sat down with our IT guys and as a risk manager role within my organization, I felt like there were some key principles that needed to be covered in a cybersecurity risk mitigation plan in our company. First, we needed to have executive summary information. I can say this because I'm an executive in our company, but if you can't deliver information in a page or less, you're going to lose the attention because there's so many things that are on our minds. We're trying to run large groups of individuals and multiple areas of responsibilities in an organization, and I wanted it to be something that was concise and meaningful. The other objective I had is that I wanted the ability to assess our current cybersecurity posture, and then I wanted to be able to measure progress toward improvement. So think of it from a dashboard reporting. I wanted to be able to pin the needle, and then I wanted to see if that needle is moving and in which direction. We needed an ability internally to assess relative risk because each one of us in our different organizations, we may have a different risk tolerance, but we might also have just different risk exposures. And we needed the ability internally to review this information and compare it against our own internally assigned level of risk. And then I wanted the ability after all of this to focus efforts on those areas that would have the biggest improvement. Because at the end of the day, this does cost time and it costs dollars. And I wanted to be able to focus that in as to where I could see the biggest bang for the buck. So when we opened up this NIST Cybersecurity Framework, we noticed that there were these 5 areas of interest. And this pie chart off to the side here has them broken down: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And what we found as we started looking through it is that we were really quite prepared, I think, from a respond and recover standpoint. Remember one of my intro discussion points? We think of that as a a cybersecurity response plan, responding and recover. So we felt like if something were to happen, we could get in there and take care of it. But as a risk manager, I wasn't satisfied with responding to it. I wanted more emphasis to be placed on how to protect and detect and identify. And so since the framework is broke up in these 5 categories, I developed a tool or a way of calculating a score, and I put more weight on the front end of it. So when you look at this pie chart with the different percentages, these are just arbitrary assignments. There's nothing in the framework that sets those percentages, but we chose to put those percentages in our own organization. And the weights that are assigned to each of them flow through in how our cybersecurity risk posture score is calculated. And then we went through each one of these areas, and the way that the NIST framework is designed is you go through each one of these categories. By the way, they've got some subcategories, and then it breaks it down even further. And then when you get down to the lowest category level, there's a volume of NIST publications that are referenced to give you some ideas as to how to go in and address the issue, okay? So when we look at these 5 functional areas here, it's broken down into about 89 subcategories. It looks to be exhaustive. It's several pages long. And we went through it, and literally every one of them, line by line, we assessed what our acceptable risk tolerances were on each and where we felt like we were currently at as regarding a risk level because of practices or policies or procedures that we had in place. And we went through each one of these on a line-by-line basis and discussed that internally. What we found is that the respond and recover and identify, those were areas where I felt like as an executive with risk management responsibility, I had more input on what our acceptable level of risk might be. Whereas those in the IT department who knew the detect and protect sections, that's much more technical as you go through the document. I had to rely on my IT manager to come back and tell me where he felt like our risk level was. And by the way, any one of you can go in and talk to your IT department and say, are we at risk? And they're going to find some way in which they are. They all know they are. But it's this trade-off, right? We spend money and we spend our time and we try to do the best we can, but there's always going to be some vulnerabilities, and they know where they are. And so that was a helpful conversation. And then we went through each one of these and we did a gap analysis where and I'll give you an example of the sample report. If you have interest in some of the behind the scenes calculations, I'd be happy to share it. But we went through each one of the subcategories, calculated a gap, and we multiplied that by the weights of these functional areas, and we came up with a score. So say 68 was our score. And that number could be put on a management report as sort of pinning the needle as to where we're at in terms of our current risk, cybersecurity risk posture. And this is kind of an example of what this report looks like. We've had and this is all sample data, by the way, none of it is company proprietary, but we've got our 5 functional areas, we've assigned our weight, there's a score that's calculated as a function of the weight, and we see then that our risk is a score of 68. Well, what does that mean? 68 is maybe a really good score in golf, but a bad score in basketball. And so we had to develop a risk profile on a scale of 1 to 100, and we considered a bunch of different ideas internally. We could have just run a straight line from 1 to 100, but that didn't really make sense to us because we knew that there's probably a point at which, even if you've done some things, you're so far out of industry best practice that you're going to be a fail. So it could be a score of 1 to 40 where you're still a fail before you start actually seeing some improvements. Again, without getting into too technical of details, being a finance guy, knowing that interest rate is a means for compensating for risk, I actually took some bond data and calculated a risk distribution profile that I was really proud of. And then that score of 68, I'm able to communicate back to my management team and say, at a score of 68 of 100, that's moderate cybersecurity risk. And then as we make improvements on each one of those 89 subcategories contained within the framework, and then run this report again, I can see that number moving from 68 to 69 to 70. And as it does so, I'm moving out of moderate cybersecurity risk into perhaps acceptable cybersecurity risk, or as we approach 100, ideal, right? So that's the way we designed this management report, as a way of providing some executive visibility. And what ends up happening now is there's a constant conversation between IT and management as to what activities we're doing. And it's everything from, here are specific actions we're doing, to here are budget dollars that I need to request. And in fact, just anecdotally, one of the things we found as we reviewed the framework, there was a specific question that said, do you include cybersecurity risk assessment as part of your annual risk assessment meeting? And we turned to each other and said, we don't have an annual risk assessment meeting. And so that changed the way that we did business. We held a meeting, we pulled our directors together, we went through and held a risk assessment meeting to cover any and all risks, including cybersecurity. And then what we did now is we've included that as part of our strategic planning process. So when we get into our capital budgeting and our strategic plan, we have to, by internally imposed rules, we have to address every risk that we've identified that is in a high consequence with high likelihood, including cybersecurity, as part of our capital budgeting plan. And this is a way of helping us to recognize that even though this may be hard to quantify in a rate of return perspective, it's something that we can very easily quantify in terms of a risk and our risk tolerance. The last area that I wanted to cover on this report is just this areas of interest, and there's a code there, DEAE-3, that ties back to the cybersecurity framework. That's saying that this is the detect section, there's a category within it of AE with a subcategory 3, and what it does is it gives some additional detail behind this area of interest, and our report we use we say the top 3. And so functionally, think of this. If I've got a report that I'm using 89 of these subcategories, and I sit down with my IT manager, his first response to me was, this is going to take at least half of an FTE to go through and complete this. And I told him, you're looking at this all wrong. This is not additional work. This is a new way in which you are going to do the work that you are already doing. It's a framework to guide your current activities. with the flavor and view of cybersecurity in everything that you do. And so I said, I don't care if you go through, I mean, I do, but I don't care when you get the 89 categories reviewed and addressed. Let's just start with one. Come back to me in 2 weeks' time and just tell me one that you're going to work on right now. And I told him that, you know, this is a 5-year or even longer. I mean, Special Agent Bobbitt will tell you, cybersecurity is not a I get it done. It's a continuous process, right? So this report allows us to then focus on our top 3 areas of interest. Internally, we assign a priority to it for whatever reason. We have the discretion of assigning whatever that is. And I use just a simple 1, 2, or 3 priority classification, 1 being the highest priority. And then we just put in an estimated cost. And literally, I don't want our guys to spend time getting that down to the dollar. I just want to know, is this a single dollar sign, a double, triple? Where is it on that scale? And then the report helps me identify who it is that's assigned to accomplishing that subcategory. And then we have a way that we capture some notes. And what we found is that there were ways that we could have made significant improvements that had little dollar amount. And that gave us some channeled focus where we can make the biggest bang for the buck to start directing some efforts and make significant improvements immediately. And we've seen some really positive results from this, and it's extended even beyond some of this internal reporting. For instance, we began really curious to know, as we were building out a cybersecurity risk mitigation plan, what some of our larger IT vendors have in their company. And what we were surprised to find, and I won't give any names, but there are large IT vendors that don't have a cybersecurity risk mitigation plan. I couldn't believe it. And I thought, you got to be kidding me. And of course, anybody who's familiar with the Target cybersecurity breach knows that the way that the perpetrators were able to get into their system was through their HVAC provider. It was a vendor that was attached to their network, and that's how they gained entrance. And so we said, we're not going to be a target in this respect. We're going to make sure that if we've got vendors that are connecting to our network, that we've at least had a conversation. So I believe perhaps everybody in this room goes through a vendor qualification process. A vendor that you're going to work with has to meet certain technical requirements. There has to be usually some sort of a credit arrangement that's set up with you and the vendor. We've now added, as a matter of public policy, a discussion requiring the vendor to not necessarily provide us a copy of their cybersecurity risk mitigation plan, but to disclose to us whether or not they have it, whether or not they're using the NIST Cybersecurity Framework as part of that cybersecurity risk mitigation plan, and whether or not they would be willing to sit down and discuss with us the contents of it so that we can come to a mutual arrangement on cybersecurity risk tolerance levels, the same way that we would with any other sort of technical or financial arrangements that you make. It's part of the negotiating process for us now, because we take these things serious. And what we found is that there's been an amazing response. The last little bit I'd just say to you is that all of this is available for you to use. You can go pull it down and use it any way that you wish. The FCC, in our industry, NIST, they've made it very clear they want this to be a voluntary adoption to give you the most flexibility to go through and design a plan that would make the most sense for you and your business. And this is what we found is that this is a successful way for us to go through and responding to the executive order calling upon our industries to make some voluntary improvements, and we've seen some significant benefits from doing it. And as we've gone through and done this, I've had a number of opportunities to visit with folks, both at the FCC and at NIST, and in situations similar to this, to kind of share some of our lessons learned. And we treat these things with some passion, and we're willing to, none of this is anything that's proprietary. We're willing to share it because we believe we all stand to benefit together if we make these improvements. So thank you for your time. I'd be happy to entertain any questions that you might have. Yes?
Yeah. Yeah, we can.
Oh, first off, questions from the board, please.
First of all, Special Agent, thank you for scaring us. And then Jeff, thank you for giving us a framework on how to start getting control of this, because I know these are all very daunting and and challenging to do. Thanks very much for y'all's presentations.
Yeah, you bet.
Any other questions?
Question here.
Hi. What would you say, and this is for any of you, what would you say are the greatest cybersecurity threats to Wyoming's energy sector?
I can tell you some of the core risks exist regardless of the industry. So for instance, I'll bet you I could take anybody in this room, and 1/3 of you I could find a yellow sticky note on the inside of your drawer in your desk that has some password to something. And it's human access is where the biggest problems are. And so part of that is discipline. A lot of the facilities plant that you all run are out in some rural areas. I remember, just anecdotally, when I first started talking about this in my organization, I was thinking in my mind, how am I going to encourage people to be more disciplined with restricted access and that kind of stuff? And I pulled up into the local gas station in the morning, and it was early spring, so it was still quite cold out. And there were 9 cars lined up in front of the gas station, every one of them running, while the people were inside getting their coffee on their way to work. And I thought, how can I teach somebody to keep facilities and information secure when they're comfortable enough in their surroundings to just leave their cars running when they're not even in it? And so I think the biggest risk that I see, and Special Agent Bob had pointed out, that most of the damage occurs from internal. It's discipline, and it's teaching discipline and helping them understand it. And the way to combat that is to use ways in which you and your industry are already familiar with. So safety is a good translation over into cybersecurity, or restricted physical access due to some of the points that were mentioned about adjusting the dials in terms of allowable temperatures, that kind of stuff. We think of those things in context of saying, yeah, this is very important. Translating that over into protecting cybersecurity information is probably the greatest immediate benefit or impact, I should say.
Ron Calvert, Utility System Efficiencies. In recent years, there's been a growing number of standards from the federal level. North American Electric Liability Council from FERC and their CIP standards, critical infrastructure protection for the electric industry. And they talk about protecting critical cyber systems and the critical substations around the grid, and it's expanding. So on the energy sector side, it seems like there are federal standards that are coming out, and people are getting, it's mandatory requirement, they're getting protective measures in place. The IT departments are developing procedures and implementing these things. What about the other industries? What about pipelines and transportation? Are there any federal regulations in the cyber sector?
It is true that this is happening across all critical infrastructure industries. About 6 months ago, I was asked to come up and give this exact presentation to the people at FCC, DOE, Coast Guard, a few of these others that are considered critical infrastructure industries. No media was allowed because it was intended to be an open table conversation. And I'll just tell you, these regulating entities are scared. They don't see anything happening from industry that gives them the level of comfort that things are happening. And so they keep throwing out this threat of regulation. And yet, to Special Agent Bobbitt's point, is that the voluntary adoption is the way to go. And we're dealing with this, anybody who's seen the Apple Pay or the Google Wallet or some of these other phone services, what industry is saying is that rather than trying to keep information protected and secure, let's just start trying to make the information meaningless. And so in a lot of these transactions that you can do now through mobile pay, it generates a one-time single-use credit card number, and then it's done. And so it doesn't matter if you get it out. Well, so what happens in a regulated environment is I have to say by regulation that I'm keeping my information secure, but my customers are demanding that I implement this other here as well. And so the way to respond to it is, this isn't our opportunity as industries to step forward and to make proactive investments and to demonstrate that we're doing things on it and working with one another in our relationships. So that we can demonstrate that we're actually doing something about it. And this is where I believe the InfraGuard is an important part. The information sharing is a great way of saying we're doing something about it. And we may not be able to stave off all regulation on it, but I can tell you your industry is the same as ours. The more we can stave off, the better we are efficiently, and the better we can respond to additional threats.
Well, Jay, good job, sir, and we appreciate you putting this together. Gentlemen, thank you for coming. Let's give all these folks a hand.